Well, we're going to assume that whoever is coming is here. So I do hope that you guys, and forgive me, it's very dark. I just checked into an Airbnb. I'm attending an innovation conference, and none of the lights in the room work with one exception. So I'm going to be a little bit dark. And it's, by the time we wrap up, it'll probably be pretty dark in here. Okay. So hopefully you've received both Leland's email and my email. And we are going to move you into breakout groups today for the first time. I really would like to just have you guys roll up your sleeves. We did, of course, have a handful of readings. And just given the interest of time, if we're going to have the opportunity to spend time with you guys in breakout rooms, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on the reading about the end of bureaucracy. Okay, the end of bureaucracy is a fascinating, cutting-edge approach by one of the companies I respect more than any in the world. And what's remarkable is this is a former Chinese state-owned major appliance company, meaning refrigerators, washers, and dryers. And it is now probably more likely to be the company written about by Harvard than any other company on the planet. They are radically innovative in the way that they organize. But given the background of most of you, I don't think it is where we're going to get the most value for our time together today. So I would like to ask you guys, if you could comment first on the Linda Hill reading. I think that's relevant to anybody that is a leader or wants to be a leader in an organization. So Linda Hill, Harvard Business School professor, has been pretty prolific in publishing in Harvard Business Review. Anybody want to share your thoughts on what you took away from the reading with Linda Hill? I didn't intend to stump you. Okay. So if there's nothing to share at the moment. Okay. Yes, Vanessa, hello. Thank you for saving me.
So what I was thinking about while reading this was, so I'm the chair of our digital equity committee in the district. So when thinking about like that, the culture and the community and building that community with that group so that there can be deep thinking and there can be change. So I highlighted that section just to think about that. But we haven't started meeting yet this year. So just thinking about that before approaching our first meeting and making sure that's the focus of our first meeting this year.
Yeah. And again, people have to feel comfortable, right, in order to bring the best of themselves and to be willing to be, open and candid about what they're seeing. So that's great. Thank you, Vanessa. Julie?
On that one, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was this definition of purpose as who is in the group or why it exists, not what a group does.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Bethany, we're going to get to geek out together again today. So what did you take away from the reading?
Yeah, I loved talking about creative abrasion and the two ingredients being intellectual diversity and conflict. And I had been on a webinar this morning with a gal that leads generative AI for Accenture. And she said one of the things, she was one of the early employees for the Amazon, what is it? The intelligent thing that talks at Amazon. I don't even know. My daughter.
Oh, you mean Alexa? You're talking about Alexa?
Yeah. And she said she was the only woman, Latina mother in the room. And that the ideas that she'd come with, the gentleman in the room who had computer science degrees and everything else would say that won't work. No one's interested in that. Yeah. And this article, like, just immediately, like, when I heard her say that, I was like, that's a perfect example of needing that diversity in the room.
Yeah. It's just amazing to me that, and that this is the antithesis of what we're going to talk about today, right? This is the counter example Okay. It won't work is not productive for anybody. And the fact that she's bringing such a fresh perspective on so many different levels would make you want to listen more, right? So here is a very interesting slide, okay? This slide was published just a week ago. It comes from McKinsey. I think most of you know McKinsey, the elite corporate strategy firm. And what they're doing here, having interviewed many different companies, is they're looking at the level of engagement of the workforce across a wide range of industries. And so what we see should be very disturbing to leaders, okay? More than half of employees across many industries are mildly disengaged to being disruptive, having basically quietly quit on the job. So it's as if you are dragging along a weight, or you are Sisyphus pushing the boulder uphill, okay? Now, when we went through the Great Resignation, what I always would say is the Great Resignation was a failure in leadership, okay? Great leaders know how to engage their people. And so you have this situation where you have a very small number of people that are thriving stars. And you have a good percentage that are reliable and committed, but it's not as if they're going to go out of their way to get the job done, right? And so as a founder of startups, I can't afford to have anybody other than thriving stars, as an example. But in this economy, it is so incumbent upon leaders to completely shift the mix on this chart, right? You don't want to be dragging along the vast majority of your team or your department or your company. And so it turns out that a lot of things that are the underlying reasons for this lack of engagement are things that we can, as leaders, really affect. So, compensation may be beyond the reach of many because it's an institutional type of decision that goes beyond most of your pay grade. Although certainly if people are performing well, one would think that the ability to see some kind of financial incentive would be there. But to give people, this goes back to Julie's answer from a minute ago, right? To make sure that people are engaging in purposeful, meaningful work, right? To give people more flexibility in the way that they get their jobs done. It's not about face time, meaning, how many hours, right? When I worked at McKinsey, right, it was very clear that people stayed in the office just because it looked good to leave late, okay? To leave late was a badge of courage, badge of honor, okay? And we all are too busy today to have to, pretend that we're working when we're not, right? Let's work when we're at our best, okay? I can't tell you how many times when I'm engaged with companies, how rising stars feel like they're not really being mentored, they're not being coached, they're not being given opportunities to grow. And then we go back to, what Bethany said, unsupportive people work. That's never going to work. Now, how do you think that changes this woman's attempt to put the next idea on the table, right? It shuts her down, right? And an unsafe workplace environment may not just be where we're seeing like an Activision where there was aggressive sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm talking about just, people don't feel like they're comfortable or safe bringing themselves to work for a variety of reasons, okay? So we have the ability as leaders to impact most of these high score items. And that's really where someone like a Linda Hill's reading comes in, right? Innovation is not about solo genius, right? The notion that Steve Jobs spoke to God is just PR. And he had an extraordinary team of people around that shared his vision, shared purpose. And obviously we're people that play at the A level every day in order to be able to, be retained by someone like Steve Jobs. But when you go understand how Apple became the company that it is today, and you look at all of the remarkable talent that worked. I'm not saying it was easy to work for Steve Jobs, but he provided an environment where people could bring their greatness to work. And so this now comes from the author of the Creative Confidence reading, and that is David Kelly, the founder of IDEO. We spoke about him at some length last week. Creative people are often portrayed as lone geniuses or rugged individuals. But what we have found that many of our best ideas result from collaborating with other people, including the only Latina woman in the room who brings a completely different perspective, right? From make-a-thon to multidisciplinary teams, we treat creativity as a team sport. My video off too, just to prevent that from happening again, okay? My voice will be with you, but I will preserve bandwidth so we don't lose everybody. So now I got to go back and find my slides. Okay, reshare. There we go. Okay. This is all about employees. If employees are engaged, they are going to bring their very best selves to the project, the venture, to the event, whatever it is. Okay. And believe it or not, you may not know this, but I know this. You all have superpowers. Okay. I promise you, you all have superpowers. You may think a lot about your weaknesses, but let me assure you that we all do have unique strengths, unique capabilities. And of course, being aware of what those are is very important. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? That does happen from self-assessments, right? Using assessment instruments. It does happen from having great coaches, mentors who care about your development and who are willing to speak openly and honestly with you about, what you are extraordinary at and what you can improve upon. And we're all in the same boat. And so the three components of intrinsic motivation come from a book by the great social scientist Daniel Pink called Drive. And what Pink says, and I've seen this time and time again, that the way that we engage or motivate our teams is they have to align with the sense of purpose of the work that we're doing, right? And the values. We need to trust them. We need to give them a tremendous amount of autonomy to figure out how they're going to get the work done, right? As long as we're aligned on the goal, we should not be telling them this is how you need to do it. We should be saying, this is what we need you to get done. You go figure out the best way to do it. And what I have found, especially with Gen Z and younger millennials, is they are all about being on a learning curve constantly. If they're not on a learning curve, over a 6-month period, they're gone. They're just literally gone. And so giving them the opportunity to master new skills, take on new responsibilities, new projects is critical. So there's a remarkable researcher at Harvard, and Teresa Amabile has done a lot of work around creativity. And one of the coolest studies I've seen is she went out and she created a jury of people in the art world. And she asked artists across all mediums to submit 12 pieces of their artwork. And it was completely blind. So the jury had no idea, what was what. And so 6 of those submissions were based on commissions that had been requested from municipal governments or museums or wherever. And 6 of them were from art that they created from their soul. Okay. And so you have 6 and 6, right? You have the control group and you have the stuff that they had to do it. They couldn't not do it. And the jury then went through as objectively as they could, measuring the creative output. And you would imagine, and of course it's absolutely true, that the art that was created from within them was dramatically more creative than the stuff that they had been told. They had been given a brief. They had been given a set of requirements. It must do this. It has to look like this. Okay. So when we give people the opportunity to do what they love, do what is truly, in their hearts, it's amazing. I've run 200 hackathons. I can't tell you what the human, creative source is capable of if you just give them the space. So let's, I don't know how many NBA fans we are, and I don't know if anybody recognizes the guy in the suit. He's known as the Zen Master. And I think this is a very accessible example of what we're talking about. When Phil Collins, who used to play in his career as really a second or third tier player in the NBA for the New York Knicks, when he showed up in Chicago, the Bulls already had Michael Jordan. They already had Scottie Pippen. They already had Luke Longley. They already had Dennis Rodman, and they were losing. Okay. They had an incredible collection of talent, and they couldn't win. And what Jackson was able to do is he understood each of their superpowers. He understood what they were best at. And he didn't treat them as a monolithic group of NBA players. He treated them as individuals. He understood what they needed to do to grow. And in so doing, they won 6 NBA championships under his leadership. So you may say, maybe he got lucky, but the answer was no, he didn't, because he repeated that a second time. He went out to Los Angeles, and these two guys in the gold and purple, Kobe Bryant on the left, Shaq O'Neal on the right, they hated each other's guts. These guys did not like each other, and they were losing, and they had an incredible collection of talent. And he got these guys to play nice together, to bring out their very best. And they won another 5 championships. Okay. So this to me is just is an accessible example of what great leaders, mentors, coaches can do to bring out the best of their teams. Okay. And so if we go into Amabil's work, which is very consistent with Linda Hill's work, right? Creativity is at that point of intersection of we have well, first of all, we have to be motivated, right? If we're not motivated, we're not going to engage. We're not going to put our best work forward. Obviously, we need to bring expertise, but that expertise needs to be diverse, right? There needs to be many different kinds of expertise to have that kind of creative abrasion. And then obviously we need to build our muscle set of creative thinking skills. And I'll talk more about that because you can regain creative confidence. And so the important thing to understand is that creativity is the first step in the innovation process. If you are not thinking outside the box, if you are not coming up with novel approaches, if you're not stepping outside of the tried and true, then you're not going to come up with the kind of unique ideas that are going to allow, an organization to really stand out from its peers or from its competitors, right? So I love this quote. Leading innovation is not about getting people to follow you into the future. It's about getting them to co-create the future with you. Isn't that so much more exciting? Rather than being told, go fetch this, it's like, I know we want to do something. Let's figure it out together. My God, that is such an incredibly satisfying professional experience when we're able to do that. Okay. And so a lot of times, like I was in India and we're sitting around the table and one of the leaders said, how is it possible with all these smart people in the room that we make such stupid decisions? Okay. And unfortunately, that's the world of large organizations, right? And that is, it's not because people are dumb. It's not because they're evil. It's just things have become set in concrete. And so Babson, most of you probably know Babson College. Babson College has been named by U.S. News and World Report the top entrepreneurship school at the undergraduate level 27 years in a row. And this week, the Wall Street Journal named them a top 10 institution ahead of a lot of Ivy League institutions. Okay. And so they talk a lot about entrepreneurial thought in action. And this is really just an infographic that captures the way that Babson educates future leaders, right? And it's completely consistent with what we're talking about today. Okay. So when I was in India, I saw this article, right, which is engineers have to reimagine their roles as the world speeds up. We have to reinvent will be an engineer. Tools like data analytics and generative AI will help us with this. And they're defining the new engineer, right? We could be defining accountant, the new project manager, right? The new tech leader, the new, you name it. Okay. And so I think this is very important for leaders to understand. We need to help shape people that are prepared for future challenges, not today's challenges. So as we think about the kind of leaders I respect, out of Silicon Valley, this is a 40-year-old Silicon Valley company, right? That's ancient in Silicon Valley. This is the company that makes TurboTax, and it makes Mint, it makes Quicken, QuickBooks. And let me tell you, Brad Smith, no longer the CEO, is now the chairman, walked the talk, right? Our mission, our values, our culture of innovation set us apart as a great place to work. Our 8,000 employees are innovators and entrepreneurs that are inspired by the important work that they do, which is delighting customers and improving the financial lives of millions. I've worked with this company for years. They run this company like an incubator. It's an incredibly flat organization, very much like Higher is. And people are empowered. They work in cross-disciplinary teams. They use the design thinking methodologies that we went through in some detail last week. And they are given incredible autonomy to identify problems and then come up with solutions. And the C-suite doesn't regard themselves as bosses. They actually call themselves the unbossed corporation. They view themselves as managers. And they win Innovative Company of the year after year after year because of the culture that they've created. Okay. And this is an organization, again, it's 40 years old. In Silicon Valley, that's like ancient Mesopotamia. Okay, that's ancient history. And then we see the same thing with our good friends at Higher. Okay, we encourage employees to become entrepreneurs. And a lot of times people will call their employees all kinds of names that are just cliche and are meaningless. But Intuit and Higher mean it. We treat you like an entrepreneur, meaning you have the ability to do what you need to do to get the job done. Okay. And so this is all about a team of teams. It's not a hierarchy anymore. And what you have is an organization that is a lot like a beehive. You've got 4,000 autonomous units acting in harmony. Okay. And every single person on that team, right? Unlike the old model on the left, the command and control model, the military command model, you've got people that are completely self-managing. Okay. It's a wide open market of ideas and talent. If someone sees a better opportunity, you as a leader don't realize you are rewarded for allowing someone to grow enough in their skill set and to have the confidence to take on a new role. And so they have these things called micro enterprises where they make their own hiring decisions. They have P&L responsibility, which is just amazing, right? They're expected to actually validate their value by going out and finding external investment. Okay. Right. And they're not required to consume the internal services of their parent company. If they believe that better, more economical services are available elsewhere, they're given freedom, right? So basically they treat them like adults is the bottom line, right? They're treating them like adults. So, and finally, what is the micro enterprise? So what you see is you see these huge enterprises. So you have, for a specific product, you might have different kinds of target markets. So one micro enterprise targets young urbanites. Another one might be more value price for very budget conscious people. Another might be targeting people with more of a premium approach. One of them cares deeply about internet connected things or IoT. Another one is focused on export markets. And these micro enterprises are the ones that are driving innovation. And then there is a range of different sales and design and support and production nodes that are providing services to these micro enterprises. And at any time, anyone in any of those micro enterprises can say, you know what, I now want to be the CEO of a new enterprise, micro enterprise. I believe there is an opportunity to take what we're doing into a completely new market, a completely new geography, a completely new space. And so now I'm going to recruit a team of people that share my vision, and we're going to go off and we're going to try to do this. Now, of course, if they don't show promise, they're not going to get to continue. But as long as they show promise, they continue to be supported by the company by being given financial and human resources and services to support them. Okay, so that is the higher model. And this is where you have the transformative microenterprise on the left, but you have the incubation microenterprise on the right, meaning you're always coming up with new next generation micro businesses that are going to continue to kind of, allow you to grow the business. So you're constantly regenerating, just like the cells in a body, continuous regeneration. Okay. So now we're going to talk quickly about creativity. And I wanted to ask you now about the Pixar reading. Anybody have any thoughts on the Pixar reading? Bethany, I love the icon that you use there. Yeah, that's a new feature. That's a new feature in Zoom. It's the human hand feature. Awesome. I love it.
No, I thought it was, I mean, I read that one last. So I was kind of like, I didn't, I mean, going from kind of the end of bureaucracy to collective genius to Pixar, I was sort of like, all right. I mean, it just didn't feel as much as they were really imbuing the culture. A couple of times, and I highlighted, forgive me, but it talks about there's one or two people that are creative leaders on a project, and I'm like, well, that feels contrary to what we just kind of talked about. So that's sort of my take.
All right, so I guess what I'm hearing you say is you weren't feeling it. It wasn't as inspirational, right? It wasn't as radical, right? It wasn't radical. It was relatively relatively expected, right? That's kind of how you would expect something to work. I get it. Okay. All right. You know what I love about you? You're my class contrarian. Okay. That is a role that I value, and I'm going to ask you to keep that going. Okay. Thank you. All right. Anybody want to go straight up the middle and tell me something they like? Tracy, what about you?
The part I did like, I definitely agree with Bethany, was a little different in that it was focusing on getting the people that already have the talent back into the room to create things, rather than developing the team that they did have. The post-mortem meetings, I thought was very interesting, and it really is something that people do have difficulty discussing honestly and openly.
Yeah, I mean, the pre-mortem and the post-mortem are very interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of people will, I mean, my God, they will do anything they can to avoid that meeting. Okay. They will travel out of the country to avoid that meeting. Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. Hey, Pav.
Hey, so I think after reading most of the materials here, and especially the Pixar one, is that the conclusions that I come away with is that I'm usually, the designer in the team, one of the workers. So for me to relate to this type of approach is pretty hard, because I'm the one that is like, okay, I'm going to be one that's going to be by higher ups being judged, directed, trying to be motivated to do the work to my best ability for their gains. So for me, like, I'm always reading, so it's like a psychological play and sort of battle between me and whoever is directing me. I like the messaging of like having a safe space, having a place where you can share ideas. And I definitely appreciate it. I think what I see is that usually what I've found is the people who actually know better the direction or are the ones that are in the grind every day. And I think the opportunity there is for them to become leaders as well. Just like I think what the reading about the Hyatt or the company that treats each one as entrepreneur.
Higher it's called.
As entrepreneur. I resonate with that because I think I have more of a entrepreneurial mindset. I have had my own two businesses. The only thing that I walk away from people being treated as entrepreneurs within a large corporations is that usually when you're an entrepreneur, when you're starting out, you're hustling day and night, nonstop, everything's on hold. And I feel like that's unsustainable with the big corporations because there's never an end. Where with entrepreneurial, once you grow the business enough, there is a way to implement others, other individuals to help with building the business. So being entrepreneur and being always on the hustle, it's a recipe for burnout. So that's my thoughts about the readings.
And what I would say, right? So as you said, right, you're a contributor, right? You're operating at sort of the, you know, the first level of contribution, right? And so in the higher case or the intuitive case, right, there's a high level of appreciation for what you bring to the discussion, right? That's the point, right? And whether you actually are getting that today or not, you know, obviously is an important consideration for you, right? And then one of the questions then becomes, do you sit down with your leader and have that discussion about, you know, hey, I've been taking this course, right? I wanted to share with you some of the things that we've been reading about, some of the things that we've been learning. You know, I really believe that this will help the group go to the next level, right? And if you're not comfortable having that discussion with your immediate supervisor, right, there's a lot of information in that, right? And maybe some of your peers that are working alongside of you would feel the same way. And potentially, you know, you guys would, as a team, have this discussion with your supervisor together and say, can we try doing things a little differently, right? So, you know, and that's something that only you can judge whether there's a will for that kind of stuff. But my hope is, you know, all of you are taking this and doing everything you can to kind of make your professional lives more meaningful as a result of it, right? Yeah, Owen, hi. Owen, would you turn on there you are. Hey, Owen.
Hey, yeah, thanks for this, excuse me, for this discussion. I think what comes to my mind is, I think was mentioned last week, is there's a very thin line between being insubordinate and being innovative. And in my case, I feel like the Pixar reading was, you know, it's kind of like energy. It's like sustainability, and you know, there's radical sustainability, like getting ourselves to, you know, carbon neutral in 10 years, and then there are, you know, incremental steps that we can take to make ourselves more sustainable. And I feel like that was an incremental step in the innovation sense, and allowing teams to feel empowered to be slightly insubordinate.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Owen. So I'm showing this. This is one of my favorite podcasts. Okay. And it's for geeks like me and Bethany, I think. Okay. This is a pretty technically oriented podcast. But the reason I bring it up is a couple of weeks ago, I don't know how many of you have heard of Burning Man. Burning Man is an event that happens in the Nevada desert and has been happening for a very long time. And on the Hard Fork episode, right, this past year, Burning Man did what they called drowning. It wound up being flooded, and they had just horrific conditions with mud, and it turned out to be quite disastrous. But by bringing on someone who's been to Burning Man 10 years in a row, he shared something that I thought was interesting. And this is the very ultimate end event, right? When they burn this structure, okay? And what this gentleman said, okay, and his name is Adrian Aoun. And he reported directly to Larry Page, the co-founder of Google. And while working for Larry Page, Adrian had some very meaningful responsibilities. One of them is he helped start Google's AI division. I think we all know Google is one of the leaders in the world in AI. But he also started something called Sidewalk Labs. And Sidewalk Labs was something that Google Smart Cities was doing to make cities far more livable, right? To make them much more sustainable, to, you know, take cars off the roads, to give people the ability to walk to pretty much anywhere they needed to walk to, right? So it was a complete reimagination of what a city could be. And the two cities that were at the sort of the leading edge of this were San Jose, California, and Toronto. And when Aoun got on and he was asked by, you know, the podcast host is an incredibly bright New York Times reporter. And he's a great interviewer. I said, so, what is it that led you to go? He goes, well, the first time I went, Larry Page more or less insisted that I go to Burning Man. And he said, and I really did not want to go, but now I'm so glad that I go, because what it does, Burning Man, there are no rules. Okay. It's a pretty crazy experience, right? I've never been, I've never had a desire to go. But there are no rules. And so he said, when you go into a social structure with no rules, you can't take anything for granted. And as a result of that, you really reframe the way that you think about the world, right? So he said it was a very mind expanding and very reality bending experience, because every variable changed simultaneously. And it gave him the insight that led to the creation of Sidewalk Labs, okay? Because Larry Page said, I want to create a new universe, a new city with a new set of rules and a new social contract. And so the reason that I'm bringing this up is because what we're going to do in a little while is we're going to go into breakout rooms. And I'm going to ask you, with the support of your teammates, to try to step out of your current worldview and see if you can't look at a project that you're working on today, or a problem that you're wrestling with, and look at it from a completely different vantage point than what your background might be as a designer, as an accountant or finance person like Pam, as a project manager, change management enabler like Bethany, as an IT leader like Vanessa, right? And so the thing that I will tell you is, we lose creative confidence in elementary school. Okay, it's unfortunately, it's just completely taken out of us. And it is an essential part of any company, any individual having a successful career and being innovative. And it turns out that as leaders, as we saw before, management practices have huge impact on creativity. So everything we talked about with Linda Hill, okay, and everything we talked about with examples like Intuit and Haier, they have a tremendous amount of ability to affect creativity. And so what I'm going to ask you guys to do, just go through a few slides here. Okay. Has anybody ever done the marshmallow challenge? Anybody know this? Bethany does, no one else does. Okay.
On it.
Okay, so that's Vanessa as well. Okay. So for the rest of you,
Still on it. Okay. I found this on the web for Has Anybody Ever Done the Marshmallow Challenge?
Oh, okay.
Check it out.
Siri decided to join the class. If there's anybody from Brown, charge her full tuition. Okay. Get tuition from Siri. She can't just crash this class. All right. So the Marshmallow Challenge is something that has been around for a while. And what happens is you have a team and you give them 18 minutes to build the tallest freestanding structure they can build with some incredibly simple, inexpensive materials. 20 sticks of spaghetti, 3 feet of tape, 3 feet of string, and a marshmallow. And the only rule is, at the end, the marshmallow must be on top. And then you measure the height. And so, so what you get then is, there's been a lot of social experiments about the kind of people that win and the kind of people that lose. So let me ask you to take a guess, based on everything that we've been talking about. What demographic do you think winds up winning the Marshmallow Challenge? Vanessa, you are a ringer, aren't you? You a pool hustler too? If I come down to Providence to play pool, you're going to hustle me?
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
Kindergartners.
Yeah, 5-year-olds. So they will, and why? Vanessa, you know why? Because
they work together, they have fun, they don't have any other constructs to work off of. They haven't, been squashed from creativity yet.
Exactly. They haven't been put through the meat grinder yet, right? And so to them, they just play. And so you look at, first of all, the group that does the worst. If anybody has a law degree, my apologies. I'm not trying to insult you directly, but lawyers do the absolute worst. Okay. which I take great joy in, okay? Lawyers love to argue. Another group that does very, very bad is CEOs. When you put a bunch of older white dudes together and you get them to do this 18-minute challenge, they spend 17 minutes trying to establish alpha male dominance, and then it just leaves a minute for them to actually do the work, okay? And what's amazing is when you add just one woman to the CEO team, just one woman, typically an executive assistant, they perform dramatically better just by bringing some female energy to level out that testosterone, okay? The group that does the absolute best, and it's almost an unfair fight, is architects and engineers, because they've been trained to build structures. So they have a certain level of expertise, okay? But the message is that young kids, as Vanessa said, 5-year-old kids dramatically outperform almost any other demographic than people that do this for a living, okay? And that to me is a very, and it happens consistently over thousands and thousands of these. And if you are so interested, there's a great TED Talk about this very phenomena, okay? And so we want to go back to that creative inner child that we've left behind sometime along the way. And what's really amazing is that people who believe that they lack creativity believe it's all of their inability to draw, as if somehow drawing is the be-all, end-all litmus test of being creative, right? If I can't draw, then I must not be creative, which is crazy, okay? Just crazy. And so what is it that holds us back from allowing us to go back to that creative inner child? We're afraid of the messy unknown, right? And I can tell you as a professor, right? I often have students, especially students that are trained in the sciences and the engineering world. They want everything to have an 18 decimal answer. They want to be told exactly what the deliverable should be, okay? They are very uncomfortable with the messy unknown, very uncomfortable with ambiguity, okay? They're fearful that someone might judge their idea and make it look like they're weird. They're afraid to take the first step, right? It's almost like writer's block. And they are afraid of losing control, okay? And I love this New Yorker cartoon. Did you know that, my husband, Harry, was the guy that came up with the idea for the daiquiri. He just never did anything with it, okay? He just didn't have the creative confidence to make this his own, okay? This is very real, by the way. It's very, very real. And so how do we conquer the fear of embracing our creative inner person, right? We break down challenges into small steps to gain our creative confidence. We build confidence by succeeding at one step after another. And creativity is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. It's not just a talent you're born with. And then step 0 of being creative is you don't try to be creative under duress. Some very interesting academic studies have been done that show that if you look at different control groups, if someone is sitting in a room or someone is stationary in some way, and you measure the creative output, and then you look at a different group now that they went off and they actually went for a walk and they started ideating during their walk. The group ideating during their walk was 60% more productive than a stationary group. If someone is bound to a wheelchair and they're sitting in a room, and then someone just takes them on a walk with the wheelchair, okay, just moving, just absorbing the world around them, they become far more productive, right? So to me, step 0 is, how do we create the physiological conditions for creativity? I love having meetings when I go for a walk, right? A lot of times if someone wants to talk about something significant, all right, let's go for a walk, okay? Let's go outside and walk for 30 minutes. Let's take our meeting while we're walking, okay? You can even do it on a treadmill, side by side with someone on a treadmill, or side by side with someone on an exercise bike, if that's something that you're comfortable with, right? But it really makes a huge difference. It's widely documented to make a big difference. Okay. So let's look at another person that reframed the world. Does anybody recognize what this move is called in the high jump? And anybody of a generation that knows who initiated this? So there was a gentleman by the name of Dick Fosbury, and he decided, you know what, there's no rule for having me go over the high jump head first with my back toward the pole. And it was called the Fosbury flop. And everybody laughed at him until he won a gold medal in the Olympics. It was like, oh, that actually works. Maybe we should try that. Okay. Or some of you may not recognize this is an older version of the Golden State Warriors. Anybody recognize this guy? Anybody in the room of a certain generation? This is Rick Barry. And Rick Barry said, you know what, there's no rule about shooting free throws underhand. And he decided he would use this unique motion. He became the greatest free throw shooter in the history of the NBA. Now, did some people laugh at him? Yeah, but he took that shot to the bank. Okay. So these are just examples of people that are reframing the world around them. Okay. How about our good friends from India? The India Space and Research Organization, right? Doing frugal innovation. I'm sure most of you know, they just sent a rocket that landed. They were the first country to ever land on the south side of the moon, where they believe there is water that could sustain life. They spent $70 million, which in the world of space engineering it's lunch money, okay? The US spends billions of dollars. And so they decided they would work backwards from a time constraint, and they would come up with a way to put something up on the moon, land it safely on the moon, and do it at a tiny fraction of the cost that other major nations have been spending money on, okay? And then I had the opportunity during the early days of COVID to organize a design challenge. So Mass General Hospital reached out to me and said, can you create a design challenge so that we can go out and we can have anybody anywhere in the world create a critical care class mechanical ventilator at a time when we had a great ventilator shortage. And I was able to get 213 teams from 43 countries participate. Most of them could not spell ventilator when it started. And yet 30 days later, the team that won, creating this ventilator, very, very modern, the average ventilator is a $50,000 device. This provided 80% of the capability, and it was manufacturable for $2,500 USD, an order of magnitude less expensive. We had a non-exclusive license, open source license. It had to be made out of simple off-the-shelf parts. Dramatically changed the economics of critical care ventilation. And this design was chosen. And the team, so let me tell you who was in the contest. A team from Tesla did the contest. A team from SpaceX was in the contest. Bethany, a team from Accenture. Okay, from the Department of Energy, from engineering. The team that won, a group of two young, recently graduated female engineers from Smith College in Western Massachusetts. And most people this is an all-female school. It's one of the Seven Sisters. It is known largely as a liberal arts school. And yet this group of 32 women and their remarkable professor, Susanna Howe, who is a marathon runner, a jazz saxophonist, a mother of two, an incredibly inspiring teacher mentor, put out the word, and within an hour, 32 women said, yeah, why not? What else? We're not doing anything else during the pandemic. We're all locked down. And they came up with the project idea and the winning idea. Now, you know who finished number two? A group of high school students from Maine. Any think of Portland, Maine as Silicon Valley? It's an art enclave and a gourmet enclave. The leader of the team under the professor was a 15-year-old girl, a woman, sophomore, named Elizabeth McCool. So Bethany, when the senior partner says to a Latina woman, that's not a good idea, then he's a pretty dumb guy, okay? And the third place was given to an inventor from Scotland who was building a commercial coffee maker and saw the ability to convert that design into a very effective critical care ventilator, okay? So these are just some simple examples of reframing things, right? And in the case of Smith Vent, you don't need a respiratory therapist or a medical doctor, right? They designed the screen to be like an iPhone. It's all different digital faces, user faces and touchscreen to the critical care, the IC unit or the emergency room or the back of an ambulance, so that we don't have to, run into the problem of not enough trained respiratory therapists. So with that, we're going to take 20 minutes. And Rachel, I think you have created some breakout rooms. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. So Rachel, you may have to push people into the breakout rooms. And what I've asked Rachel to do is help us do this, and Alim as well, who's our TA, make the groups as diverse as we can make them, so that, you're working with, at least there's some gender diversity. Someone might be at Brown, someone may not be at Brown. Maybe you have different functional backgrounds. But I'm going to ask you to, in the group of 3, think about a project that you're working on right now, or think about a problem you're solving. And with the help of your 2 teammates, think about how you might completely reframe that from a completely different perspective. Just look at it upside down and inside out, and see if you can't draw some that might give you a very different point of view on how you might attack a problem, or, finish up that project. So I'm going to ask you to take 20 minutes. And when you come back at a quarter after, we will then have 10 minutes for each group to report out. Okay? So this is a roll up your sleeves and interact with one another and try this on for size. Okay? Just see what it feels like to try to reframe the problem or the project, and see what kind of insights you might come up with. Okay? And we will close the breakout rooms at a quarter after, and you will be magically whisked back into the main classroom. And then I will just go through each team, and I will just ask you guys to report out. And I'll ask each of you to think about who will be the spokesperson for the team. Okay? So pretty straightforward exercise, I hope. A little different than just lecture and discussion. Okay? So I think just like Captain Spock had the ability to teleport people, you're now being teleported into breakout rooms. All right. Well, guys, since we're living on borrowed time, I think we want to get right to it. So, Rachel, how many teams did we ultimately have? 4?
Yes, 4.
All right. And anybody want to break the ice and raise your hand? One of the 4 individual team spokespeople want to raise your hand and get us started? And really just, share 1 or 2 insights maybe about how you may have helped. Someone may have been able to reframe something in a way that might have some ability to be useful to them. Anybody want to share?
I can share.
Please, Pop. Thank you.
So Rebecca was my partner, and she
Yep.
was super helpful in finding a solution for issues that I'm facing with, whether it be the amount of work within given time, so
Yeah.
that within the agile sprints that we work in, and to offload some of the work that could be done by people that do not necessarily need to have creative or technical skill.
Interesting.
The proposal was to involve Center of Career Exploration at Brown to give a chance for students to be able to get involved in professional practice.
I love that. And I can tell you, as a professor, there's very little that students love more than the opportunity to engage with, in the professional world, right, as students. So I love that idea. And is that something that you think is fairly doable?
I definitely think it's worth a conversation,
Yeah.
especially with the amount of work that my team is doing, and it definitely could open up some opportunities
Okay.
for us, but also other individual students to get practice.
I love it. So, Pav, if I can be helpful, right? So I've been hiring, graduate level and undergraduate level students to work for me as interns, as co-ops for 25 years. Okay, so I've got a lot of experience. If I can be helpful as you think about structuring this, I love that idea. That's brilliant. Great. Cool. All right. And Bethany sharing, Bethany, you want to say what you just shared?
Oh, yes. So from the session I went to this morning on generative AI, Noelle Russell, who led it, shared a link to a LinkedIn learning path that she recommends for anyone interested in generative AI and learning the
Okay.
basics.
Yeah.
So it's off topic, but I
Oh,
want
okay. Okay. All
share
right. I
that
thought maybe
impact.
you were supporting what Pav said, but that's great. Thank you. All right. Pav, thank you so much. Anyone else from your team want to weigh in before we move to a different team?
I worked with Pav on this in this conversation, or we met together.
Yeah.
And so he was also very generous in listening to my very brief problem, which is really quite simple. It's about the mode in which our team communicates to foundations that support faculty in their research
Right.
projects. When we need to
Yep.
report back to the foundations on the success of those projects,
Right.
I also often am concerned or wonder if we're being as engaging and interesting as we possibly can be, because ultimately those are the things that really drive relationships with these funding partners. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and so listening to Pav talk about his work and what his team does made me think that it might behoove us to consider partnering with groups outside of my division, which
Right.
from a bureaucracy standpoint is going to be really hard. But just drawing upon the article about the Chinese
Yeah.
science maker, which was one that I actually found the most interesting of all the readings, just
Yeah.
the notion of just quite simply going to other divisions for where this expertise lies and working with them to come up with something interesting.
That's great.
Just developing new systems for this work.
I love, and Rebecca, very interesting that I also think, working with students, because remember,
Which
students
we do.
are, okay, you already do. All right.
We have a really well-established program in that area. So
Okay. All right. And are these students that are great storytellers, visual storytellers, right? Because I can imagine making it's not the dry scientific output, right? There's something a lot more emotionally engaging about the way that the information is shared, right? Because we're all emotional beings, right? And so a backstory on the researchers, breakthroughs, but in a way that is not just about equations and using the language of science. I think it could be very, very powerful. And I'll just give you it's not from the same world, but I think it's very useful. There was one of the very first microfinance platforms was a platform called Kiva, right? And you know what microfinance is, right? You give very, very small loans to people. And this was the Muhammad Yunus insight that won him his Nobel Prize in economics. And what they did is they created a platform where you weren't just making investments in some disembodied fund, right? They would actually have a website of all of these different men and women, and they would tell their story about if you were to send $25, I would use it to, buy a peanut crushing machine to make peanut butter, or whatever it might be. And it really drove an incredible increase in the amount of investment that Kiva started to see coming into its platform because of the ability to relate to the humanity of, the investment. So I think anything that you can do to kind of humanize that, right? What I call three-dimensional storytelling, on top of maybe going outside of the, your own division, could be very helpful. Because scientists are people too, right? Last I heard. Yeah.
hopefully, yes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's great. So you guys had a very productive chat. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Who's next? Who else wants to jump in now that this team has bravely broken the ice for us? Oh, and awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so Bethany and I were paired together. We had a great conversation, not only just about the problem that we were trying to solve, but more generally about positive intelligence and being a force of positive change while innovating. But the problem we were working on was specific to a project that I have. And the goal of the project is to help special ed teachers with their paperwork. There's an enormous amount of paperwork for special ed teachers. And I was saying how I was thinking about how to leverage ChatGPT to help them do some of the more repetitive language tasks. And Bethany brought up a really good point, which was that, you know, in creating something like that, you would have to be empathetic to the teacher's familiarity or comfort with that type of technology. And so she suggested, you know, creating some sort of guidance that helps teachers work with that type of technology like ChatGPT, and helping them break down, you know, maybe barriers that they believe exist with legal and with you know, ethical considerations when using it, and showing that it's actually like a perfectly legal, perfectly ethical way to do your paperwork.
No, that's great. I mean, there's no question that generative AI is almost ideally suited for this problem, because what it's really great at is creating content, right? And so what I would say is this is the year when faculty are being trained on how to use ChatGPT. Now, you know, special education, of course, these teachers, I imagine, are overwhelmed because their budgets are always so limited, right? And there's typically a very small faculty, right? So there may be some, you know, the ability to take a lot of the content that's being published every day, right? Like, for example, if you go to OpenAI, just as the school year was starting, they published their own research specifically for teachers so that they can bring ChatGPT into the classroom, right? So how do you take what's already been created and maybe add a level of customization to it that is going to be useful to people in that unique world of special education, right? And I think this is very straightforward. So that's great. Cool. Anything else coming from my contrarian? Did you have anything else you want to share, either of you two?
No, we had a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Very productive. Thank you both. All right. Who else wants to jump in now that we're all warmed up? Do I have to go all Socratic? Vanessa, thank you. I'm just about to go all Socratic on you.
I have a quick one. One of my charges as tech coach is trying to build a K-12 computer science continuum in the district. We've been working for years on this. And so we're finally, as of this year, solid on our 5 to 12. So I presented to my partners, John and Melissa, that I've been getting pushback at the elementary level for trying to implement, you know, a K-4. That's our elementary school. The reason being is that overwhelmed. There's new curriculums every year, and there's a fear that it'll just be too much for them. So my group suggested that I try and circumvent that barrier, because my solution in my head was I need to train them. I need to train the K-4 teachers. They need to understand computer science or computational thinking and find ways to integrate it. But the suggestion was to, I think I might have paused on you guys.
No, you're good. We're
good. I got the warning. What they suggested was to try and go to third-party groups that could come in grant funded. So it's not, you know, something that the teachers have to take a burden on, but might actually take some, you know, give them some relief.
No, that's great. And hopefully what it does is it over time, it inspires them, right? That they see the success and and they see how effective it is. Right. And at some point, it's a very smooth transition from the granted outside third party, because it's now just part of the way that, you know, the K-4 runs. So that's great. Okay. And listen, I mean, you know, a lot of times it does come down to resources, right? It comes down to there's just not enough people or time in the day. And so do you feel like you have access to those granted resources fairly easily to do that?
I feel confident that I can search for them.
Okay, yeah.
That's,
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
sit
yeah.
in Google, but.
Okay, I mean, I would think that, right, I see so many, and I'm assuming these are NGOs is what we're talking about largely, that have this as a mandate? Would that be what we're talking about? Non-governmental organizations, nonprofits that see this as as part of their mandate to go into schools and teach them coding curriculums, or what would the profile look like of one of these groups that might come in?
I don't know. I think it was John, I think maybe mentioned Google has like coding academies for students.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many, there's
Mhm.
so many, and so many in the nonprofit world. And I don't know if you're in a very diverse district, but there are a lot of people that are, trying to bring more STEM to underrepresented groups, but I think there's an infinite supply of them, quite frankly. Just finding the right fit for you. That's great.
One comment that I can make about this, I have a little bit of experience with it. I used to teach at Rhode Island College, and I taught at Providence Technical and Career Academy. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons I ended up teaching a class there, specifically coding, is that one of these third-party for-profit companies failed miserably because they were hired to come in and teach a class, but when the budgets were not aligning with their demand, they just left the students of Providence for dry. So
They just literally left. They just walked away, like just
they
literally
walked
walked out.
They
Wow.
walked away. And so my sort of experience is that be very cautious about
Yeah.
bringing in parties outside. And obviously the Providence School Department can be much, much better about vetting and not hiring their own sort of buddies into
Yeah.
it. But yeah, like these kids deserve the best, and definitely vetting and making sure they have a good track record is key if you're going to hire a third party.
Oh yeah, there's a reason why we do reference checks, right? That's just incredible that they just walked out right in the middle of a school year. It's crazy. All right, great input. Thank you. All right, so who else have we not heard from? I see Eric, I see Tracy, I see Julie, I see.
Talk about Eric and Tracy in my group. So I was actually just entering it in the chat because I thought we were going to run out of time, but I'll just mention very briefly. I presented a challenge where I tried an open forum concept in a faculty development thing and ended up with fairly low attendance. So we sort of brainstormed that people might need to sort of warm up into an open forum format, that they might actually need some more structure to know what to expect in going into that to generate a bit more interest in what we're doing.
So maybe some more just facilitated smaller groups.
Right. And I'm really grateful for their brainstorming. It was really useful.
That's great. And anybody else on the team want to jump in with anything else? Okay. So how will you take that to the next level then, Julie? What will you do now to sort of get back to a level where you actually have a great level of attendance in an open forum? Is this something that you'll start to calendarize and start putting some small group meetings together?
Well, that's what we had attempted.
Okay.
So, but I think ultimately, I think one big takeaway that I wrote down was that it would be useful to provide some examples of the kinds of things that people might bring up and see if that helps people sort of attach to, oh, okay, we could use the time to do this, or
Right. And are these awkward discussions, crucial conversations, or is it just business as usual?
Well, I would be open to any of those.
All right. No, the reason, I mean, obviously, we went through this period where there was a lot of affinity groups, right? A lot of diversity, equity, inclusion led affinity groups, and a lot of awkward discussions were being facilitated. And obviously, we got all kinds of reactions to those, right? So I guess the question is, what would lead people not to come to something if the discussions are straightforward, other than they're just busy or they just don't, they're just not. Does it go back to the engagement issue that we started the discussion with? Is that a big part of it as well? Just a lack of engagement. So, hey, ain't my job. So, I'm not getting paid to do this. So I got other things to do.
That's not my perception, but but it's probably a fair
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Okay.
probably true for someone, right? Like,
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it sounds like maybe there's a bunch of underlying reasons, and what would be best for you would be to literally talk to a group of people and say, hey, you haven't been coming. Why?
Mhm.
I'm not going to hold it against you, but just, help me understand why you didn't come.
Mhm.
And you might be surprised with what they tell you, right?
Sure.
Maybe the coffee sucks, right? So
Maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so I would think that, just a lot of one-on-one discussions to kind of tease out why people aren't coming. Maybe
Mhm.
the timing was bad on the schedule and had nothing to do with, the issue. We don't know until we ask,
Mhm.
right? Cool. All right, awesome. All right, anybody want the last word before we wrap up for the evening? All right, well, so we are 75% of the way through this journey. These 90 minutes go by very quickly, at least from my perspective. There's always so much more I wish I could cover, but I guess that's the budget we have. So I will look forward to seeing all of you next week, and we will definitely do another breakout. I'm really pleased to see how productive you all were in these breakout rooms, even though we only were in them for 20 minutes. So I think that's really a great sign. So I wish you a great night and a great week, and we will see you next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.